Hi guys, I wanted to do a little quick video for you today as we're moving further along in our research papers. It seemed when I looked at the discussion boards that maybe some people were a little confused about how to do a research question, and this week we're going to work on turning the research question into a thesis statement, and also then working on creating an outline so that we can start drafting. If you look at your syllabus, you'll see that a draft of the research paper is going to be due next Thursday, so that's not really a lot of time, especially if you haven't really been doing much research yet. So hopefully by this point everybody has their topic. I'm going to stick with that same topic that we used as an example in my message from last week, which is mountaintop removal mining. So that's the topic, but that's not the research question. So the research question, you want it to be sort of a big picture question. So not small things like what is mountaintop removal mining? That is a sub-question, and that's something you'll answer through the paper. Your research question should be the big overall picture. So if I already know that I want to look at the environment and how that's connected with mountaintop removal mining, my research question could be something like, what are the effects of mountaintop removal mining on the environment in Appalachia? Now, after you do the research question, before you would move on to creating your thesis statement, you're going to be doing all of your research, or at least a lot of your research. So you're going to be discovering things like negative effects on the environment, and that maybe is going to be effects on the animals. That might be effects on water. Could be effects of things like erosion. Could be effects to people and health. Maybe you're seeing not necessarily positive effects on the environment, but positives of mountaintop removal in general, like jobs, economy, need for energy and resources, etc. You might also be finding alternatives to mountaintop removal mining, and even things that people are doing to try to help some of the problems to the environment, like reclamation, like some fixes. Can't think of a good word for that right now, but you get the idea. So by the time I'm done with my initial research, I probably am going to have an idea of which direction I want to take my paper in. Sorry, I'm just fixing my hasty typing there. So I'm going to say that I want to take my essay in the direction of mountaintop removal mining and negative effects on the environment. So my thesis statement is going to essentially be an answer to the question, to the research question. So if my research question was, what are the effects of mountaintop removal mining on the environment? I can say, the effects of mountaintop removal on the environment are detrimental to animals, to people, and to the water. So my thesis statement could look something like this. Mountaintop removal mining is detrimental to the environment because it affects animals, water, and the health of the people living in the region. So that's what we're going to call a working thesis statement. And by working thesis statement, I mean that I could edit and change that as I work. I could learn more about my topic as I'm researching, and I might want to adjust it. But for right now, that's a really good thesis because it tells us what we're going to try to prove through the paper, that mountaintop removal mining is detrimental to the environment, and it tells us how we're going to prove it. So from this thesis, we can now tell that we're going to have some information about how it affects animals. We're going to have some information about how it affects the water. And we're going to have information about how it affects the health of the people living in the region. Okay, so if you come up with a good thesis statement, that essentially lays your paper out for you. And that takes you to the next step, which is what you're also going to be working on this week, which is the outline. So you're probably familiar with outlines from high school, and maybe you've done them with Roman numerals and that kind of thing in the past. If that's the kind of outline you want to make, that's fine, do that. If you would rather just do something a little more, not necessarily as formal, a little bit more informal, a little bit sketchier, that's okay too. The purpose of the outline is just to help you start to get your ideas organized and to help me see that you're getting your ideas organized. So I'm just going to do a real quick little brief one here. So the first thing in your outline would be, of course, I'm going to go ahead and do the Roman numerals just because that's familiar, would be your introduction. And in your introduction would be your thesis statement. After the introduction, you're probably going to have some background. So for this paper, I would want to probably say what is mountaintop removal mining. I'd want to tell my readers what actually the process is. I might want to describe where it happens, where Appalachia is, etc. So in that background paragraph, that's anything that your reader would need to know in order to understand the rest of the essay. So then maybe my third point is where I'm going to start getting into the points that are on my thesis. So maybe here's where I'm going to start talking about animals. And I mean, honestly, I don't know enough about this off the top of my head to fill in the rest of the outline, how I would talk about animals, but I might talk about, like, them losing their water source, losing their habitats. I might talk about some endangered species that are affected by mountaintop removal projects. And I might talk about, like, the ecosystem. I don't know. So the next point, you would follow your thesis. The next point would be talking about water. So that might be, filling in streams. That might be pollution. And then my final point would be people and health. And that could be things like, remember in Hillbilly, they talked about the boulder that hit that home. It was dislodged, landslides, etc. And then we would have our conclusion. Well, before the conclusion, we might want to take a moment and consider the other side. So that's where we could talk about some positives of mountaintop removal, like jobs, etc. But then we would want to reinforce our side why we're still right. And then you would want to come back with your conclusion. Now, just because each of these has one Roman numeral doesn't mean that each of them would only have one paragraph. It's entirely possible that in animals you'd have 3 or 4 paragraphs, in water you'd have a couple of paragraphs. So this is just the way that it's laid out. It doesn't mean that those are your only paragraphs. So I hope that this helped you a little bit with developing your thesis and developing your outline. We will talk some more later, and hopefully you are all on the right track to your research paper.